Ready.
You ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to South Kesteven District Council Planning Committee meeting, November the 17th, 2022. I'm Councillor David Bellamy. I'm chairing the Planning Committee meeting this afternoon. I'm not aware of any fire drills, so if the fire alarm does sound, please leave the building by the nearest exit, and the assembly area is out the front of the building on the green. Please can everybody ensure they have turned off their mobile phones to silent so we don't have any interruptions. Thank you. Also, please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Could you ensure that your microphones, members, could you ensure your microphones are turned off when not speaking? We have with us today Assistant Director of Planning, Emma Whitaker, Principal Planning Officer, Phil Jordan, Legal Services, James Neal, Democratic Services, Amy Pride, Democratic Services Officer, James Wellborn. I think James, yes, James is there, super. And we probably be getting a Public Protection Officer joining us, Aisha Kirkham. She'll probably be back in a second. Oh, she is there. Thank you, Alicia. Could we have apologies for absence, please, Amy?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Rosemary Capey-Brown, Councillor Ian Stokes and Councillor John Cottier. Our substitutes today are Councillor Sarah Trotter and Councillor Gloria Johnson. And just to note that Councillor Ashley Baxter will be filling the Alliance SK vacancy today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, disclosure of interest. Does anyone have any disclosure of interest for consideration? If you believe you have at any point during the meeting, then please let us know. We've got a few slight adjustments to the agenda, so I'm moving a motion to vary the order of the agenda so that the two items are reversed. So on the agenda, we'll be taking item 4 first and then item 3 second. I've moved the motion. Could I have a seconder, please?
Right. I'll just ask a question. I'd just like to ask the reasoning for that, please. And also, can I say we haven't had a roll call yet? And can I also ask, I'm assuming, am I correct that the minutes of the last meeting will be coming forward at the start of the next meeting? Is that correct?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Okay. I think we was going to dispense with the roll calls purely because it's recorded anyway by Amy of Democracy. And what was the other question?
Just the reason for the alteration in your.
It's to do with the speakers being available. With one of the speakers is going to join us via Skype or whichever it is, so by video call. Okay. I've moved that we change the order of the agenda, so could we have a vote on that, please? That's carried. Thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Baxter. Votes against? Abstentions? Thank you. I'm also moving to suspend section 5.3 of the planning procedures so that speakers will have 5 minutes rather than 3. This is due to this being an exceptionally complex issue, and it's a one-off issue, and so I'm proposing that the speakers are given 5 minutes. So could we have a seconder, please? Yep. And that's for both applications. So we'll take the vote. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? We'll just make a note that Councillor Judy Stevens has just joined the meeting as well. I'd also like to move to adjourn the meeting for 20 minutes so that members can read the additional items which came out yesterday afternoon. So I'm proposing that the additional items we're adjourning for 20 minutes, and could I have a seconder, please? Thank you. And all those in favour, please. Anybody against? Abstentions? Thank you very much. So we're adjourning for back here by 1:30, please. Thank you. Could you take your seats, please? Thank you. The next agenda item is application number S20/0098. Could you read out the list of speakers, please, Emma? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll take them in reverse order. So we've got agenda item 4, which is use of the land for shooting, application reference S20/0098. We've got Councillor Penny Milnes going to speak as ward councillor. We've got David Rawlins and Celia Derbyshire speaking against the application. And we've got Richard Gray speaking for the application. I believe, though, he's got a written statement because he's unable to attend today. We've also got the applicant, Mr. Mark Crane, and I believe he's got his acoustic expert available online to answer any questions should members have any.
Thank you, Emma.
And then, oh, sorry, do you want me to do the second item? It's fine, that's all right.
So we'll hand over to Phil now, who's going to do the presentation. Thank you, Phil.
Good afternoon, members. Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, members of the public as well. So the first item today is S20/0098, use of land as a clay shooting ground. I've already been introduced, but I'm Phil Jordan, one of the principal planning officers, and the site is at Brandonwood Clay Shooting Ground off Brandon Road near Stubden. Clearly, members have read the main committee report on additional items paper, and there's a, I think it's fair to say this is a complicated case with an extensive site history. I've tried to keep this presentation simple and focus on what I consider to be the key issues, and that's really noting that there's several speakers and the ability to ask questions that I'm sure are going to get into more of the detail. So the main issues this presentation is going to focus on is the current position and what officers consider to be the fallback position, and then the main issue being the impact of the proposal on amenity as a result of noise. So this opening slide, just for a bit of context, pointer works. Broadly, where the red circle is, that's the location of the site. You can see there's surrounding villages, Fenton, Stubden, Brandon down in the southeast corner here. For members that aren't familiar, this is right up in the north of the district, and running somewhere to the north of the site here is the A17. That's the main A road that connects Sleaford and Newark. The two, again, just for a bit of context, the two yellow circles there just identify two go-kart racing tracks. Into the bottom one's the PFI kart racing circuit, and then Fullbeck kart circuit to the north of it. There are other, as well as those main villages that surround the site, there are other residential receptors which are closer, and I've got a slide that illustrates that. So this slide just shows the red line of the application proposal. The extent of the site is all in single ownership, and is covered by that red line. Just want members just to focus on, I've got another slide that illustrates the current planning permission, and that's broadly where my pointer's outlining at the moment. So the wooded area, and then roughly half the area to the north of that. There is a part of the ownership includes Gorse Lodge, which has previously been in residential use, and it's now used as a and has planning permission as a tourist accommodation. And that's in the same ownership, but is outside the red line of this application. Just a few photos here. I mean, it's quite difficult really to illustrate what's there on the ground, and I think the main issues are better covered by some of the aerial slides I've got. But effectively, there's a small clubhouse which is subject to the next application, and car park. The wooded area where there's a number of fixed shooting stands, and then there are some more open areas that surround the woods, which include bunds in part and other fixed shooting stands. Appreciate this isn't, I'm not sure how much of a picture this paints to members, but what you've got within the site, so explain, is you've got various fixed stands where clay shooting takes place, and those stands effectively fire the clays at different trajectories and can be angled in different directions, and they're designed to replicate different types of game. To the north of the site, you've got something called a skeet, and that's again, I'm not going to profess to be an expert on all the individual disciplines of clay shooting, and again, the applicant is here if members want to ask further questions about that. But the skeet shooting is effectively a different type of clay shooting discipline where the shooter or the customer stays in a fixed position and fires a number of shots at different angles in an arc. The main types of shooting that are on offer at the moment, there's something called a sporting round, and that's where participants pay for a number of shots, advertised to be 50, 75 or 100 on the website, and they typically walk around the site and fire a number of different clays at the different fixed shooting points. The skeet, as I say, is a separate discipline where I believe used in clay shooting competitions, where you stand in a fixed position and fire shots at different angles. As well as these regular events, the shoot also advertises currently simulated game days and one-off corporate days, and they're more of a bespoke, what I understand to be a bespoke package that people can book on a one-off basis. But again, I think if there's any more queries on the very detail of what goes on at the shoot, it's probably best for members to ask the applicant. So I say that this slide again just shows, and this is taken from the noise assessment, it shows where the various closest residential receptors are around the site, and without going into the detail of each one, you can see that Fenton in the northwest, so the edge of that village is impacted or within that sort of closest distance, and then there are other one-off residential receptors as well as the village of Stubdom, which are within that assessment area. And I think what this really illustrates is that there are receptors in sort of most directions surrounding the shoot. So just going to focus a little bit on the current planning permission, and members will note from the main report that the site history is complex and that there's been a significant number of applications over the years. But to try and simplify things, the current planning permission that the shoot or the shoot would have to rely on is from 2000, and that reference shown on the screen there. The red line for that application doesn't cover the entire site, it covers the wooded area, and then, as I say, roughly half that land to the north. just going back a little bit, prior to the current planning permission in 2000, there was the first planning permission on the site was a temporary permission granted in 1995. And that also had a limit at the time for 50 days shooting a year. The extant permission, which has been illustrated on the last slide, the extent of the land is understood by officers to have a 50-day shooting limit per annum. There was a restriction, but all of these details are in the form of a letter, but that effectively restricts the shoot to being used as a public pay and enterprise. And then there was a separate letter that's referred to in the planning condition that specifies where the access should be. The fallback position is effectively what could the shoot do lawfully with the additional land surrounding that red line, and that fallback position would fall under the 28 days permitted development rights, which are allowed for the temporary use of land. And officers consider that there is a real prospect of that additional land being used within those permitted development rights, given both the existing type of shooting that happens on the site and what's been put forward by this proposal. What is important is over and above those restrictions of the 50 days within the existing planning permission and the 28 days within the fallback position, there are no other further planning controls in terms of noise management. But that's not to say that there isn't other legislation, and in particular the Environmental Protection Act would be relevant in terms of managing a noise nuisance if that threshold was reached. But as things stand and over the number of years the shoot's currently operated, the council hasn't evidenced noise nuisance to date. So again, to try and provide quite a simple overview of what is quite a complicated issue is, I've tried to sort of distill what impacts amenity into two areas really. And the first one of those is when and how long the noise happens. And those bullet points on the screen there illustrate the basis of what could form planning conditions, and also are in some instances covered by the existing 50-day control. So the obvious one that we've talked about already is how many days a year can the shoot actually operate? And then going into a bit more detail, we can look to then limit and specify the actual times of day and the days of the week that the shooting can take place. A bit more detail still, we've got conditions which limit then the actual number of days a week that shooting can happen. And then the bottom one is really just about the certainty of when that shooting happens. So in my involvements with the shoot, one of the things I've picked up on when complaints happen, or one of the most common times you get complaints is when shooting takes place when it's unexpected. So the shoot typically advertises opening hours for 2 days a week, but then additionally to that sometimes operates these one-off days. And it's often when the one-off days occur, I think when they're unexpected, and there's a bit less certainty over what's happening that correlates to a complaint. And the second area is then, well, actually, what is causing the issues and how much noise there is, and again, I think other potentially the public and the noise expert may speak about this in more detail than I do, but effectively we're talking about the impact from the shooting noise, and I don't want to overly patronize members and try to describe what a gunshot is, but I think in some form or another most members will will understand what gunshot sounds like. The way this is assessed in planning terms is something called, or in relation to clay pigeon shooting, is something called shooting noise level. And the way that's assessed is shooting noise at any receptor is recorded for a period of time. And then the 25 highest shots over a half an hour period are then averaged out. And that gives what's called a shooting noise level. So it's very different in terms of, often when we're looking at things in planning, we're talking about a constant noise source. So it might be noise from a factory generator, traffic noise, as I say, something that's reasonably constant, whereas this is that more impulsive noise and can be sort of erratic in its nature as well. I understand, and so you might get a short flurry of shots and then a break and then some more shots, but the means of assessing it is this shooting noise level. Just skipping down to the second bullet point, the environmental protection guidance, which is the only specific guidance for clay shooting noise that talks about this in some detail, talks about shooting noise level between 55 decibels and 65 decibels. And what it says in that guidance is, it says at 55 decibels, you're likely to get annoyance. So that's the point at which if you can hear it at that level, it's likely to start annoying you. And then at 65, it says annoyance is very likely, or words to that effect. There's a number of variables, obviously, that impact upon what shooting noise level is. It can be the type of activity on the site, the distance that the receptor is from that activity, the weather conditions, primarily wind direction and other atmospheric conditions, the direction of fire can influence it. And so then the question is how do you manage that? And again, it's not straightforward. It's complicated by the number of variables, and that is one of the sort of difficult questions that's posed. So in terms of this application, in order to seek to control the noise beyond what that current position is. So if we reflect back on what the current position is, the 50 days within the red line area, plus the 28 days with limited further controls, what would justify an increase to 150 days, which has been applied for in this application? And the full details are set out in the additional items paper. There's some additional conditions there that weren't in the main report, but it's summarised as controls on operational hours, a limit on the number of days shooting to 4 days per week, a requirement for all shoots on the site to be publicised, a noise management plan that's been put together by an acoustic expert with input from council officers. And again, there's now an additional condition which requires that noise management plan to be reviewed. Limits on the skeet. So there's a condition there that prevents that being used at all on Sundays and bank holidays. That particular type of shooting was found to be one of the most or result in the highest noise levels. The requirement for a weather monitoring plan and recording of shooting activity in a complaints protocol. And all those conditions are really there and designed to help both monitor what's happening at the site and manage that noise level. And then lastly, the applicant has undertaken to complete a unilateral undertaking, and that's a legal agreement between the council and the shoot. And what that would do is that would require that if planning permission was granted, it would require that permission to be properly implemented, and then that previous permission, which sits there in the background, to effectively be revoked. Just one additional condition that this came after the additional items paper, and so I'm having to sort of verbally update on it. And this has been agreed by the applicant. There was some doubt around a condition restricting the skeet, which within the wording of the condition says in its current position. And so what this condition does on the screen here is it says, we'll see if we can move that. Okay, thanks, Jordan. So yeah, I'll let members read it, but effectively what that condition does is it says no skeet shooting unless in the position that it's currently in, which is the one that's been assessed, will be allowed unless a new noise assessment is carried out by a competent person, and then the relevant mitigation strategy put in place. And so effectively what that condition does is it prevents, or if the skeet is moved to any new position within the site, it would be subject to a whole new noise assessment. So this is a conclusion and a summary really of what the officer recommendation is, and it's accepted. That's what's proposed is a significantly greater number of days shooting than the current position. So that current position, remind members, is what's understood to be the 50-day limit plus the 28 days permitted development rights. However, whilst there is that significantly greater number of days proposed, there is a greater level of control secured through the noise management plan and those restrictive conditions. The unilateral undertaking gives certainty over the permission actually being implemented, and on balance, it's considered that this would result in a reduction in noise impact in the locality, and therefore an improvement on the current position in terms of amenity for local residents. That leads to a recommendation of approval subject to the completion of that unilateral undertaking and the conditions that are listed in the additional items paper, plus that one additional condition that I verbally updated. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Phil, for the presentation. We now move to the speakers, and the first speaker is District Councillor and Ward Councillor Penny Milnes. Councillor Milnes, you have 5 minutes. You may finish the sentence you're reading, but not start another paragraph. Thank you, which you probably already know.
The problem with this clay shooting site is that it is too close to residential properties. The CIH recommends a buffer zone of at least 1,500 metres to protect from the high impact noise of shooting, but there are villages and residences all around this site, either close to or actually within that distance. That's why all 5 of the parish councils surrounding the site have objected to this and earlier applications for expansion. The area is flat agricultural land which provides no noise mitigation, and as the applicant doesn't own this intervening land, there is no opportunity for mitigation measures to be introduced. As a result, local residential amenity has been impacted by the shooting noise from this site ever since it began in 1996, 19 active years of noise issues. The noise seems to be worse at Fenton, possibly because the edge of the village is only 1,200 metres from the site. Fenton is a quiet rural village with background noise levels which have consistently been measured at between 35 and 40 decibels, despite 2 go-karting tracks to the east. This application seeks to justify additional shooting noise because of the go-karting, but that noise has never been measured and shooting noise is not masked by it, as the sounds are completely different. The lack of any data on the go-kart noise and the failure to appreciate the difference in the types of noise or the cumulative impact of noise undermines the credibility of the applicant's acoustic report. Shooting noise is impulsive, sharp, penetrating, like living in a war zone. The World Health Organization picked it out as having a startle effect. It's impossible to ignore and results in changed behaviors, such as having to go indoors or go out for the day, not walk footpaths. Many complaints have been submitted over the years and substantial local objection to every planning application for increased use of the site. SKDC received comments from MASS, an independent noise consultant, on the acoustic report. Only an initial response has been seen, and she's critical of the findings. Why wasn't a full independent noise report commissioned, as I was promised earlier in the process? In particular, it questions the evidence given for mitigating noise impact by use of directional shooting. The data given doesn't support the conclusion offered. Mass's view is that no consideration has been given to the elevation of the shooting. When clays are shot high in the air, the sound spreads further. Since directional shooting is one of the key proposals of the noise management plan, this throws the whole plan into doubt. The proposed mitigation of this noise nuisance is compromised. If this proposal is passed and the noise mitigation offered isn't effective, what then? There is to be a complaints procedure, but it is to be administered, monitored, and actioned by the shoot itself. If they can demonstrate that they have followed proper procedure as set out in the plan, then no action will be deemed necessary. There is no proposed noise measuring at sensitive receptors to ensure that the actual shooting noise is within the parameters set out in that plan. Why not? The only counterweight to the very definite harm to residential amenity would be if this application supported the rural economy. There is no evidence or business plan submission to support this, so no weight should be given to it, and it cannot override the weight that should be given to the identified and experienced harm to residential amenity that this application would cause from noise which cannot be effectively mitigated and a complaints procedure with no teeth. In conclusion, this application fails on harm to amenity grounds with no public benefit to satisfy policies SP5, SD1, E5, E7, E4, and DE1. It also contradicts key elements of the NPPF and the Stubton Neighbourhood Plan. There's too much wrong with this application and everything screams refuse. However, if you are minded to approve, you can and should think more carefully about what restrictions are reasonable to impose, because it's perfectly clear that there is already a significant noise impact and that the proposed conditions are unreasonable and safe and do not go far enough in protecting residential amenity, particularly as the noise level of 60-65 dBA is too high for the location and 150 days plus, nearly 50% of the year,
30 seconds.
including every weekend, is therefore not justified. Should the site revert to the fallback position, that would not be ideal, but be better than granting this permission for massive intensification on a site where loss of residential amenity is already existing. A maximum 55 dBA limit is essential to any coexistence of the shoot with its neighbours and should be imposed anyway, where background levels are low, together with monitoring to inform any future application.
5 minutes.
Thank you, councillor Milnes. Councillor Selby?
Question, Mr. Chairman, through yourself.
Yes?
Councillor, can you tell me, please, how does this activity impact upon the local wildlife? Is there any regard for the wildlife with this activity? I don't know whether you can answer that or not. Thank you.
I believe in the report it says not. There could be doubt on that. Nobody knows quite how birds react to they or deer or anything else around the site. There's apparently no evidence.
Thank you, councillor Judy Stevens.
Thanks very much, councillor. I was just going to, you mentioned the go-karts. I don't really understand what relevance the go-karts have on this. Is it inferred that if there's a kind of tolerance of go-karts and a bit more shooting won't matter? Is that the kind of, yeah.
yes, it's indicated that because there is some go-karting going on, they can shoot at a higher level to 65 dBA. It's in the report. And what we're saying is that the go-kart is a completely different noise anyway, and shooting is not masked by that noise.
So these people have to have go-karting and clay pigeon shooting. Is it all?
Yes,
it
that's
some-
why I'm talking about cumulative impact.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you for your present. Oh, sorry.
Councillor Baxter, please.
Thank you. Could either councillor Mills or somebody point on the map where the go-karting is? I don't know if Phil can do that with the pointer. And also I wanted to ask, and I'll ask of the applicant as well, but the difference between skeet and clay shooting, is that something we need to be mindful of? Because I'm not clear of a difference in sound.
I think you'd be better off asking Phil that one when we get to the questions to the officer, because I doubt if councillor Mills would be qualified to ask that,
Yeah,
or the applicant.
yeah, Phil
please,
said
yeah.
ask the applicant, but I
Yeah.
wanted to give the opposition, so to speak, the chance. Thanks.
There's two go-karting tracks, and oh, we need to go back to. That's just the green wooded area here. That's the sort of the central area of the sheet. One of the karting tracks is shown on the OS plan there, and then the second go-karting track is to the north of that.
Councillor Trotter, please.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, councillor Mills. I know you touched on it, that you said residents were going out to avoid the noise. Is this particularly, I would understand that most people's leisure side time when they work is at weekends. Are you aware that people are particularly avoiding their right to enjoy their leisure time and going out just to get away from it? Have you found this evidenced across your discussions with the parish councils, please?
I think over the years, yes, that has been complained about. I think if you can't enjoy your garden in the summer because of the shooting, and even when you go inside and close your windows, you can still hear it. What are you to do? It's not a very happy situation. And this shoot at 150 days would operate every weekend, which at the moment under the fallback position, they weren't operating at anything like that level, and at least one summer evening in the summer. And I have been said, people standing outside, you having your coffee or praying your Sunday lunch, it's just impossible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, councillor Penny Mills. The next speaker is speaking against the application. David Rawlins, please.
Excuse me,
Excuse me,
Excuse
Mr. Rawlins.
you're not permitted to hand papers out to the council members. It needs to be submitted beforehand.
What objection can there be to handing out paper of my presentation?
Because officers haven't reviewed it and the applicant's not had the chance to look at it. So can I have a look at what it is that you're sending out, please?
It's exactly what I intend to say. But when I'm galloping through, needs to understand.
Could we please just verify that and then we'll
Mr. Rawlings, you have 5 minutes. And you may finish the sentence at the end of the 5 minutes, but please don't start another paragraph because we'll have to stop you speaking. If you could turn your microphone on, please.
Not the correct set of slides that says.
Are we sure we've got them, Phil?
It's the wrong set of slides. That's the-
Okay, your 5 minutes starts now.
Right, my name is Dave Rawlins. I'm the chairman of Fenton Parish Meeting, and I also represent the Brandon Wood Clay Shooting Residents Association. The shoot is about 1,200 metres from my home, where I've lived for 35 years. I'm not objecting to the existence of the clay pigeon shoot, operating on a 50-day days a year as a small, local and social amenity. Our concern is the huge intensification being proposed, the justification of which is based on a flawed noise assessment and an inaccurate portrayal of the facts. Let me explain. The existing permission says that the shoot can operate for 50 days per year and the shoot will not be open to the public. An increase from 50 to 150 days and an expansion of the site represents a massive intensification from a small private shoot for groups of paying guests to a commercial shoot open to the public. The application has been submitted as a use of land for clay shooting ground. Here's the current permission plan and the application plan. Right, can I have a timeout, please? Because this isn't working. Right, thank you. Start the clock again. Here's and here are the two combined. This original area, if I can't point to it, but it's the outlined in black anyway, already is a shooting ground. The applicant is permitted to shoot for 50 days a year, but not to open to the public. Nevertheless, in breach of this, the applicant opened his business to the public in 2017, which was an unauthorized material change of use. This application asks you to authorize that change of use retrospectively and to permit it indefinitely into the future. 2 slide advances, please. Right. Okay. This area to the north is not covered by the existing planning permission. It was surrounded by bunds in 2004. Its permitted use remains agricultural. It does not have permitted development rights to shoot for 28 days a year, despite what officers may believe, and I can clarify that if you need me to. And then there's this area, an open grassy field with no acoustic barriers that was specifically excluded from shooting to get the 2008 permission passed. That's it there, look. Its permitted use is agricultural and it's currently being used as a shooting ground. We assumed for no more than the permitted development rights to shoot for up to 28 days. The application asks you to change the use from agricultural to clay shooting. The new condition 11 would allow for shooting here on 2 days a month, 24 days a year, but the applicant can already shoot here for 28 days a year under permitted development rights. It's not necessary to change the use unless the reason is because the applicant is intending further intensification or development. Hold that in mind while I tell you that the acoustic report made no noise measurements of shooting in this grassy field area. And the updated acoustic report states that the management plan, shooting in different directions, and the complaint procedure won't apply to this blue zone. This is the worst area for, worst position for shooting for Fenton, and would allow, this application would allow construction of towers, taps, and other paraphernalia of shooting with no acoustic barriers, no noise management plan, and no means of ensuring that it is confined to 2 days a month. The proposed increase in shooting in the original area depends entirely on acceptance of the acoustic report, which is submitted with it. Councillor Milnes has already mentioned some flaws in the acoustic report. Mr. Jordan says that the report follows the CIEH guidance. It doesn't, and I can clarify this if asked. The part that was compliant
30
with the
seconds.
guidance shows how to measure shooting noise, show the shooting noise level of 71 decibels at Fenton, way above the recommended 55 decibels when measured shooting inside the acoustic barrier. The data of the non-compliant part of the report is so flawed, so poor, that it even failed to demonstrate that the
5
direction of
minutes.
shooting affects the noise recorded. I
Mr.
can
Rawlins, I'm
clarify
sorry.
this in some detail if asked.
Mr. Rawlins, that's it. I'm sorry, the 5 minutes is up.
Oh, right, I didn't get a 30-minute one.
Yeah. I
Please
think-
don't pass it.
Anybody got any questions for Mr. Councillor Baxter, please?
Thank you, Mr. Rawlins. I wanted to ask you the same question about skeet versus clay. I also would like to take up your invitation to ask about the permitted development rights in the north and ask you why you think that our officers are incorrect or mistaken. And similarly with the CIEH guidance. My other issue is about the public-private, and I'm not sure if this should be a question for Mr. Rawlins or for the officer, is about when does a shoot become a public shoot? Because Mr. Rawlins has just said that I think since 2017, by public I mean I think I understand it like a public car park. You just turn up and shoot. Sorry, not in a public car park. No, it's kind of on arrival, you can shoot rather than booking in ahead. Is that what's been happening since 2017 or are we confusing the words?
Could you, what was your first question again? That was about the
Skeet versus clay.
yeah, I think that's probably best answered by the applicant. It's more
Nevertheless, I'd like to ask if Mr. Rawlins doesn't have an opinion, then I'll.
Certainly, I can answer that question. Can you just ask it again? Is it the difference between the sporting and the clay shooting?
Well, we've had this mention of skeet shooting.
Yes.
And that I got the impression that there was a different noise from, and I don't understand the difference.
Okay. Am I on speaker here? Right, thank you. Yes, the difference between the two is that it was measured, right, the sporting shooting, you walk around a set of fixed stands and they shoot a clay up and you track it and shoot it. Okay. The other the skeet shooting has been identified in the acoustic report as being extremely much noisier than the sporting shooting. I would actually question that because the acoustic report is a mess, an absolute shambles. And I can clarify that. But in the skeet, you normally stand still in one position and you can choose which house it shoots from, and then you have to react and shoot across. So they're two different disciplines. And in the acoustic report, the expert, who I believe is here today. Oh, by conference only. The expert identified that the skeet shoot was louder than the sporting round. Does that answer your question? Thank you. What was the second question?
Permitted development rights, you think that our officer is mistaken?
Yes, I do. And it's confirmed in the latest solicitor's letter that this is the situation. Phil says the officer report at paragraph 7224 he's fundamentally in error. And the reason is that when you have a temporary permission use, for example, 28 days or holding a fair or something like that, you have to be able to return the land after that temporary use to its permitted use. Now, the permitted use in that little northern bunded area is agricultural. So you cannot put anything on there, on that area of land, which can not be taken away for use. But they put bunds on it in 2004. So they can't take the bunds away, use it for 28 days and put the bunds back. And it's the very fact that it is fixed that somehow the temporary use can't be used. You can't return it back.
I think we understand that.
Okay.
Have you got another question?
The CIE, Chartered Institute of Environmental Health Guidance, and then the final one was about the public-private thing.
So what was your question about the CIEH?
During Mr. Rawlings' presentation, he mentioned that I think there was a breach of CIEH guidance, and during his presentation, he invited us to ask for clarity of that if we needed it.
Okay, I can answer that. Sorry. Was that a second question, or can I answer the CIEH guidance? Can I have the set of slides, please, which say the acoustic report and slide 1. If you want clarification, I have all these slides printed out and I can show you what I intend to say. This is not the right one. It's the one that starts CIEH. That's the last slide of the last series. I believe that's the first slide in the series. No, it's not. Keep going. Unfortunately, this is a bit wordy. I do have copies of these slides if you would like them in front of you. There we go. Thank you. Okay, the CIEH guidance is, stands for the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, and it's the only satisfactory internationally recognized guidance on how to contain the noise from clay pigeon shoots. And it's designed for interaction between shoot organizers, their neighbors, and the planners whose job is to control them. It's full of good advice, but its three main points are how to measure the noise from a shoot, the definition of a major shoot, and the level of noise which causes annoyance. Okay, the first thing that you have to realize is that noise is highly impulsive, a shooting noise, and it goes from background to extremely loud every 10th of a second. So the first point is you must be measuring every 10th of a second, otherwise you're going to miss those sharp little peaks. Highly impulsive. No, there we go. So it's a unique type of sound. It's not like traffic noise. And so it has a unique measurement called the shooting noise level. And only that is applicable to clay pigeon shooting. And only if you do anything else, you can't make comparisons between a shooting noise level at one site or the other site, or comparisons over time. You need to follow the procedure. And here's the procedure. For half an hour, you record all the shooting.
Mr. Rawlins, I think this bit is in the report, actually. That bit is actually explained in the report, so members should have read that.
Which report are you referring to?
The officer report about the 25 shots per 30 minutes.
Sorry, Chair, I understand all that. What I don't get is why Mr. Rawlins thinks it's been done wrong.
Okay, I'm coming on to that.
Can you
speed it up?
If you can, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try. Definition of a major shoot, that is all 4 points, and this shoot is a major shoot. What's next? Oh, yes. I'll skip through some of these because they're rather wordy and difficult to read. In fact, I can't read them without my glasses.
Sorry, can I just interject? The point of the questions is that you can answer questions for clarification or fact. You've been asked to identify very, very quickly in summary why you believe that the report has not followed guidance. So I need you to get to the point.
Okay.
I think in a nutshell, what you're saying is you don't believe they followed the correct processes, that they should have done so when they were doing the assessment.
Yeah.
I think councillors probably ought to ask for clarification or comments from the acoustic engineer that is supporting the applicant as well.
No, because he's made the mistakes in the first place.
Sorry, Mr. Rawlings. I'm giving some advice to the planning committee. My advice to the planning committee that we ask the acoustic engineer for his comments about whether or not he believes he's followed the guidance and the appropriate procedures in the guidance.
Could we have your last question, councillor?
Yeah, it was about this public, whether the shoot is public or not, whether or not it's my understanding of what the officers said was a public shoot is one way you can just turn up and say, I've just passed by and I'd like to have a shoot. Is that what's been happening since 2017?
Right? Can I answer? Yes, basically. We were assured in the 2000 permission that it would not be open as a public pay and enter competition. That was the word they used, public pay and enter. And since 2017, that has been the permission. That has been how it's been run, with members of the public turning up, and as long as they've got a shotgun license and this sort of thing, they can pay and then they shoot. As such, there is no planning control here. And
thank you. I think that does answer the question.
Okay.
Councillor Bisnassing, please.
Thank you, Mr. Rawlings, for your presentations. I have just three simple questions
Mhm.
for you. One of them, you say, from the Fullbeck Parish Council meeting, that the land pollution from lead shot and clay shots. How much of the pollution can it be quantified? The effects of those pollutions on the land? Does it get into the vegetables, or if any such things are grown around?
No, the land is, the permitted use for the, in that black zone is for clay pigeon shooting. In the outer zone, it's agricultural, but to the best of my knowledge, it's never had crops grown on it, on that bit. However, the land is heavily polluted after 25 years or so of shooting with lead, such that it probably couldn't be ever returned back to agriculture.
So your concern is will it be the leakage onto the water system?
No, my biggest concern with the lead pollution is that they sometimes fire out over their neighbours' crops. There's never been any complaint by the neighbours, but when I offered to do lead assays, they turned me down.
Could you also please, on the second question, the proposal conflicts with local plan policies. Is that SKDC plan policies you're
Yes.
mentioning about?
I thought Councillor Milne covered those and she was prepared to answer the questions on them. But as I understand it, it doesn't conform with the policy that talks about rural development.
Mhm.
Now, they have made the statement that it will provide local employment and support for local businesses.
Mhm.
But we have no local businesses that get support from the increase in shooting. There are no hotels, no shops, no pubs in Brandon, Stubton and Fenton. And so it won't benefit the community in any ways, except perhaps for employing one extra person.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, have you got a final question?
Yes, also, I feel probably the concerns of the Parish Council is lack of trust in applicants due to continual breach of existing permissions.
Yeah.
Is that what also is your main concern?
Yes, the existing permission allows him to shoot for 50 days a year. He opened the business in 2017 and by 2018, and he would have breached that except that he opened it in July.
Mhm.
And by 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, even with the sort of COVID closures, and today, this year, 2022, he has breached the 50 days a year permissions.
Thank you.
Emma, would you like to come in on that one, please?
Thank you. I'd be very cautious, members. That is the opinion of the local residents. We are aware that they are concerned that there have been breaches beyond the limitations as set out in the planning conditions, but they are simply allegations at this stage because they are unproven. Obviously, depending on the outcome of the application today would depend on our next steps. And if we need to, we'll obviously investigate accordingly. But at the moment, they are allegations. And as a planning authority, we cannot say categorically that the applicant has breached his planning permission. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Wood, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rawlings, I'm Councillor Paul Wood. I notice what you've said is you don't object to a small clay pigeon shoot, but it's the over intensification of a larger one. But I notice what the officer has put quite extensive conditions on the proposal. He's recommending approval with extensive conditions on it. Do you not feel, have you got a problem with those conditions? Do you think they don't go far enough? I know you want it refused, but
Yes.
do you think the conditions are a problem, or?
My own feeling is that it should be refused as is and get him to come back with a proper application. Mr. Jordan's feeling is that these conditions are suitable. They're not. They're not getting us back.
I'm
to the-
sorry, Mr. Rawlings, you asked for your opinion.
Yes. My opinion is that they are not. The current changed conditions, which appeared yesterday, go some way to assuaging our concerns, but not far enough, no. I think, does that answer your question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you got any more questions? Councillor Stevens, please.
Yeah, I had a question for Emma, actually. You mentioned that at the moment, these are allegations you talk about, but I have read somewhere in here from Fenton Parish meeting that there has been lack of enforcement action. So presumably complaints have been made, and can you explain that, please?
Yes, of course. So it's known, obviously, that we had an enforcement notice that was withdrawn in 2018, I believe it was. And since then, or following the back of that, the applicant submitted the current application to try and find a way forward in terms of their proposals. The objectors have made us aware of allegations of shooting that they believe have come from the site, from the application site. It's not reasonable for a planning authority to enforce against a breach whilst we're still considering the planning application. So we've got to give due consideration to the planning application before dealing with a potential breach. The reason for that is if the committee today is minded to approve the planning application, then the notice probably falls away, because the breach would be around the 50 days and the 28 days on the other land. So it wouldn't be reasonable for us to serve. So I have to say and use the word allegation, because it's not proven. It's not proven until we've, for instance, sought confirmation and clarification from the applicant around which days he's been shooting and asked him for information. So all we've got at the moment is we've got the allegations from the residents that there has been shooting on several days over the last few years, and they believe that the noise or the shooting to come from the shoot that we're considering today. There could of course be other shooting, bird scarers, other farmers shooting on their land. So we do have to do a thorough investigation when we are investigating. So that's why I use the phrase alleged. I'm not in a position to say for sure that the applicant has breached his planning permissions, but that's not relevant today, because what you've got to consider today is the application in front of you. Is the application with a proposal for 150 days worth of shooting in a calendar year with the restrictions as set out in the conditions acceptable and better than what he's currently got? And that's the position, and that's what you've got to look at today, not the enforcement position.
Understand that, Emma, but I think one of the contentions probably today is that they've had this permission in the past with conditions, and they haven't been able, in their opinion, they haven't been able to actually work within that, and there have been breaches. And what you're saying is that in response to the reporting of those breaches, that the clay shooting, the owner has put in an application to cover those breaches, and we haven't been able to look into those breaches because there's an application in. So the people opposing are, they've got no, it doesn't seem to be very fair, does it? Because frankly, if every time somebody breached a planning condition, they then put in an application to cover it, then those initial breaches would never be investigated. So they're in a hiding to nothing. And I know that the planning, I know that that we're in a position in this country where we have we're in favour of planning unless proved otherwise. I understand that. I can't think of the exact phrase, but I understand where we are. But this does seem to be anomalous, really, that there's something gone wrong. The population have said, look, there's something going wrong here. And before that can be investigated properly, an application has gone in. One of the contentions now is that if we were to pass this with conditions, then the same thing could happen again and they put in another application and never is resolved. You know, I'm sorry, it's, you know, sometimes we sit around in a mad hatter tea party. But this does seem
I
to
think
be
we're
one of
straying
those
into
issues.
debate, councillor Stevens now.
So-
I think we're straying into debate rather than, so, councillor, thank you, Mr Rawlins. The next speaker is Celia Derbyshire, please. You have 5 minutes, Mrs Derbyshire. You can finish your sentence at the end of the 5 minutes, but please don't start another paragraph. Thank you. I'd like the officer just to see that it is the same as what. Thank you. No, that's it. Thank you. If all members of the committee have got it. Are you ready?
There are two separate elements to this application: use of the site for clay shooting and a set of proposed conditions which would permit 150 days shooting. I want to concentrate on those conditions. First and most important, the number of days. 150 days is a massive increase on the historic limit of 50. It's also more than the 120 days, which was turned down in 2018. The applicant argues that it's a reasonable limit because the noise management plan accompanying this application would mitigate the noise and protect local people from loss of residential amenity. Both of the previous speakers have referred to doubts over the methods and conclusions of the acoustic report and the noise management plan. What we're being offered is an untried and untested scheme based on flawed or incomplete data. It's also over-complex. Next slide, please. Different decibel levels on different days and in different conditions. Also, changing shooting directions, closing stands according to the wind direction. Is this really credible? And it ignores CIEH advice on decibel levels. At the Wild Tracks appeal in 2011, the inspector ruled very firmly that CIEH guidance should be followed. Next slide, please. Widely accepted across the industry, respected by planners and inspectors, why are CIEH recommendations ignored by this application? The limit proposed by the CIEH for a rural village like Fenton is 55 decibels. Next slide, please. This application depends on raising the weekday limit to 60 or even 65 decibels. Would not protect local people from loss of permissive rights on the grassy field. Shoot noise it creates is capable of mitigation so that it doesn't harm residential amenity. 78 days is the limit.
My name is Richard Gray and I live at Saxelby near Lincoln. My background in clay shooting goes back 50 years. I am now 72. In that 50 years, it's been my privilege to represent not just our county of Lincolnshire, but both England and Great Britain at clay target shooting. Clay shooting has been a constant in my life for so many years, and in recent years, though not now, I was very actively involved in the management and running of the ground, so I must declare an interest. Small grounds like this are the lifeblood of our sport. They are where our future champions are found. It is where our youngsters take their first shots under the guidance of an instructor. It is where they learn safety and a level of discipline that they will carry with them all through their lives. They come with their mums and dads who visit the ground to enjoy all-encompassing social activity with like-minded friends. This sport at Brandon welcomes people from every background, young, old, abled and disabled. It provides a valuable social centre where participants can go for a couple of hours and enjoy sport in safe and convivial surroundings. It is no different to a golf course in terms of the service it provides. This ground has been established for well over 30 years, and in that time it has been enjoyed by literally thousands of county residents as well as from further afield. The small but very vocal opposition has been relentless in trying to close the ground. The question of noise has been the mainstay of the complaint, but the infrequent sounds of shots pales into insignificance compared to the East Coast main railway line or the nearby kart racing track or the regular aircraft from both Cranwell and Waddington, or in fact the number of game shoots in the vicinity. It has always been my opinion that the opposition is more to do with the perception of those who might own guns and shoot for sport, perhaps yuppies with guns or mass murderers of wildlife, or posing a potential threat to the public, none of which are true. People who shoot for sport are just like you and me, people who wish only to enjoy their chosen sport without hindrance. Brandon Wood provides just such a place. Please let it continue. Richard Gray. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Amy. The next speaker is the applicant, Mark Crane, please. You've got five minutes, Mr. Crane. You can finish your sentence, but please don't start another paragraph after the 5 minutes is up. You'll be given 30 seconds when there's 30 seconds to go.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the members for the opportunity to address this committee. I would also like to state how surprised I am that there are so many unqualified acoustic experts in the room who feel that they have free rein to rubbish the report of a qualified and true expert in this field. I would also like to reference the fact that the case officer here has made a clear recommendation for the application to be approved. This comes almost 3 years after the application was first submitted, during which period significant time, effort and resources have been expended on both sides, my side and the council, to reach a mutually acceptable position on this application. The council officers involved have indeed encouraged and participated fully over the 3 years in the work that we have undertaken to reach this point, and I would like to thank them for that. The solution now before members allows this countryside activity to take place for the first time in over 25 years on a regulated basis, subject to planning conditions and an agreed noise management plan. In addition, a separate S106 legal agreement will ensure that the current unregulated and unenforceable planning permission will be revoked. These are major benefits that significantly outweigh any negatives, I believe. I do empathise with some of the arguments made by the objectors and fully understand their concerns about the current unregulated use of the shoot. However, the application before members today is an opportunity for those members to ensure that the objectors' concerns can be fully addressed by introducing a suite of well-drafted and enforceable planning conditions regulating the use of the land, all backed up by an agreed noise management plan. In truth, I do not have to make this application. I haven't breached any conditions. I could just continue to rely on the existing unenforceable permission. However, As a reasonable and responsible landowner, I've worked diligently with the officers for over 3 years at great time and cost to myself. This shows that this has been a genuine and sincere attempt to find a solution which strikes a reasonable balance between the needs of the business and the needs to address alleged harmful impacts identified by the objectors. I find it very, very distasteful that people have stood up here and said there is no economic benefit to the shoot. I'd like those people to talk to the 10 people who work at the shoot and all the local businesses that support my shoot by supplying goods and services to the shoot. I'd like them to face them and tell them that if the shoot it doesn't support any economic benefits, how will that affect their livelihood and their future? If indeed this application were to be refused, I would then have no option but to continue to operate the site under the previously unregulated permission. And this unique opportunity to address the objectors' concerns would be lost here today. The cycle of enforcement, appeal and proceedings we went through 4 years ago would no doubt be repeated at huge cost to everyone involved. So in summary, the current use of the site is unrestricted. Granting permission for shoots is unenforceable, including the land that Mr. Rawlings refers to at the north of the shoot, which has been shot on continually for over 10 years. I have clear advice from a partner of a UK leading law firm and a barrister from King's Chambers confirming this to be the case. I believe the council's own planning and legal officers have accepted this position. They withdrew the previous enforcement notice, which sought to restrict the use of the site, having considered our legal arguments and taken advice from their own barristers. This is an opportunity for the council to really regulate the use of the site for the first time in 25 years and put clear safeguards in place to protect local residents. This will clearly benefit everybody concerned. Ultimately, the grant of a new permission will result in the 2000 permission being revoked by entering into the S102 legal agreement, the unilateral undertaking. I therefore respectfully invite members to accept the advice of their professional planning officer and grant this permission today. Thank you.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. I believe we've got an acoustic expert on the video link. Is that?
It should be here.
Is that there, Phil? Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Would you be able to confirm that you can hear us, please, Mr.
Yes.
Rogers?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Councillor Trotter, please.
Thank you. Can you confirm, I don't know, like with game shooting, there's pegs when you go on a corporate shoot. I know it's been mentioned about a corporate shoot. How many pegs do you have at one time? Is the shooters in different locations? What I'm trying to get at is at one time, is it one person shooting the clays? Obviously, I understand some go constantly up in the air, one after the other, and some. How does it work? Can you just explain to me how many people and how often the shots are fired and how many pegs, please?
Okay. So just to qualify that point, one of the speakers talked about the fact that if the gunshot is directly in the air, which is often the case with the simulated corporate days, it's noisier. That's in fact incorrect, because if you shoot directly up in the air, the noise is travelling directly upwards. It's not travelling in the trajectory of the local villages. So I just wanted to clarify that point because it was raised earlier. Also to make note of the fact that this, in the last 12 months, we probably had no more than 9 corporate days. The corporate days that we advertise run from 10 to 15 people. There are 5 pegs. You either have 2 on a peg or 3 on a peg. So it's 10 or 15. So I noticed in one of the submissions from the objectors that they talked about the average of being 25 to 50, which again is completely and wildly inaccurate. So it's 5 pegs. You have 5 people standing in one part of the ground for no more than 10 minutes, and then you move them to a completely different part of the ground and fire clays over them. So it's meant to simulate a game shoot. So they're in a circle of 5 guns, and 5 people are shooting at any one time at targets that are thrown over them. They move through the ground. We do 3 different drives. Typically, Start time, if it's in the morning, would be 10 o'clock and the shooting will be finished by 1 o'clock.
Yeah, and is it fair to say with game shooting, obviously it relies on how many pheasants and game come up in the air. With clays, am I right in saying that it is off a trap, so it's constant? So how many clay pots actually are fired off at one time? And I understand it's different with the skeets.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a complex question because it depends on the nature of the particular corporate day. But I have a machine that holds 6 different traps. So targets are being thrown from 6 different traps over a group of 5 guns.
So how many shots are being, on average, how many shots would be fired in one go and for how long?
So if 5 guns are standing in front of the machine to shoot, they'll be typically shooting 100 clays. Shooting at 100 clays.
And how long, my last question, how long would this go on for, this 100 shots? So 100 shots at one time, is that correct?
That's correct.
So how long does this go on for? And is there a gap?
So there's a break between each of those drives, that we have refreshment breaks throughout the day. So I talk about the fact that the corporate day would typically last about 3 hours, but a vast majority of that is rest time, restocking traps and having refreshment breaks during that period.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Councillor Selby, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So you're through the chair, Mr. Chairman. I've got 2 questions for you. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Mark Crane.
Mark
Crane.
Yes, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Mark, my 2 questions are, first one, I thought I heard it earlier in our presentation, or one of the presentations, about unannounced shoots. Do you have unannounced shoots? And if so, do you take into consideration the activities of equestrianism? Because I am aware, and I have actually ridden myself around the countryside in that beautiful area, I have to say. And whilst I'm aware that Hoff on the Hill have riding for the disabled there, but I do know that there's quite a number of equestrian people around there. Do you actually go to any lengths to inform them of any unannounced shoots, if you have them?
So I talked about the fact that in the last 12 months, we've had no more than 10 corporate days. Every other day is advertised on the website as a public opening day, which is a Thursday and half a day on Sunday. I have a neighbour who runs an equestrian centre with a number of horses, literally 300 yards away from the shoot. And on a regular basis, she comes up to the shoot, into the car park when shooting's happening, to have a coffee or a bacon cob on her horses. So I think the concerns around that are perhaps slightly exaggerated.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to hear that. My second question is, Mr. Chairman, the more I hear of the arguments for and against this application today, the more I'm of the opinion and the belief that as a committee we should have a site visit. We haven't visited the site. We're not a local resident that we experience this day in, day out. If during the debate I propose a site visit, would it be possible, or would it be an issue to you if we were to have a demonstration for such a site visit?
It's quite frustrating for me to hear you say that, because you're incorrect. You've had a site visit. So the council came to the site. They put a member of the council in Fenton. We got a number of guns that shot where the skeet area was, which is considered to be the biggest problem. The wind vector was blowing towards Fenton at the time, and we released a barrage of shots towards Fenton. The young lady officer that was in Fenton answered the phone and could be heard clearly in front of a number of people saying, "I don't know what the problem is, I can hardly hear anything."
Well, can I just come back on that, Mr. Chairman? I don't know when that site visit took place, but certainly
Phil was there. So
certainly whilst I've been on this planning committee, I've not been invited as a member of this
I think
committee.
that was obviously for officers rather than for members.
Well, certainly as councillors.
I saw you both as the same. Sorry, the officers were there. Sorry.
Would you have a problem with
not a problem at all?
Okay, thank you kindly.
You'd be welcome.
Councillor Robbins, please.
Right, forgive me for being a bit naive, but do you have different guns or are there set caliber shot cartridge? Because cartridges may have differing specifications based on target range and speed and breakability. Will that affect the noise? That's question number one. And question number two is, I just wondered, you've got 50 hours initially and now you want 150. Why so dramatic increase?
Okay, so the first question, you're quite right that cartridge size and caliber will affect noise. The 12 bore is probably the largest gun caliber that will be shot at the ground, and we have strict rules, and part of the conditions on the noise management plan is that people will not shoot with anything bigger than a 28 gauge cartridge, which is deemed suitable. Other guns that are used on the site are typically 20 bore, 28 bore, and on occasion 410s, which are an awful lot smaller and a lot quieter in their noise. So, your answer to the question about 50 days is that when I bought the site and I decided to open the ground, I wasn't my fault. I wasn't aware of the supposed restriction on 50 days. For the last few years, I've run the whole operation at a significant loss. I started opening the ground on 4 days a week, which was deemed to be, which sustained the cost base of the business and turned some form of profit to sustain the business going forward. When the council approached me on the 50 days and served the enforcement notice, as I said, we worked together for a number of years to try and work a way that the business could operate successfully and, as I say, provide employment and support to local businesses and people who work or supply to the business. And the idea was that I would put together an application for 150 days, which was encouraged by the council. And at the time, I was told that it would be looked at very favourably. Since that time, I've spent much time and money working with the council to put together a noise management plan with their support, involvement and edit to try and get to the point where the business can support itself financially going forward. That's why I've applied for 150 days.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, do you want to ask the same questions that you've asked particularly any technical ones, or what's about the CIEH?
No, I've got a few. The first one is I've now become obsessed with this skeet versus clay. What is the difference, and why is the skeet more noisy?
Yeah, so without going into technical detail about skeet versus other type of shooting, what you really need to understand is that the skeet has fixed stands that never move, that are in a part of the ground which is closest to Fenton, and some of the direction of shoot on those fixed stands goes directly towards Fenton. So it has been the area which is deemed to be the most problematic in terms of noise. I referenced the site visit from the council where we shot directly from the skeet to Fenton with the prevailing noise. But I do understand that in certain circumstances, that is probably the worst area that would affect Fenton if shooting was allowed to continue there unrestricted. The skeet is probably the least popular part of the ground, doesn't get used anywhere near as much as the other side of the ground, but is an important part of my overall offering.
Thank you. I'm troubled about this 50 days. I know that you're applying now for 150 days. You've used the words unenforceable and unregulated. And I appreciate that maybe you didn't know when you took the business, but I think the officer has told us that there is a restriction to 50 days at the moment. And there is a I'm hoping to see a nod or something. There is a restriction to 50 days at the moment. And there is a restriction that it has to be booked in advance. It can't be turn up and shoot. However, on your website, it says that you're open every Sunday, every Thursday from February through to December, which is going to be, weather permitting, in the 80 days a year, plus the 9 corporate days that you've mentioned is getting on for 90 days a year. And additionally, your website says that no booking is required. So how is that because you don't recognise the current restriction because it's unenforceable, unregulated, or not?
just exactly what you've said. I never had a desire to get heavily involved with legal and Queen's Counsel expense on this particular point. But I felt I was pushed into that position, but I've been very open with the council on that. We have a clear difference of opinion on legal counsel around the enforceability of the 50 days and the conditions that are associated with that, those conditions. My view is, and my council's view is, that I'm currently operating completely unrestricted, and if I wanted to, I could shoot 365 days a year. I absolutely do not want to do that. I want to try and work to a point where the business is sustainable, and I put plans and measures in place to ensure that everybody here is protected going forward. Hence why I'm prepared to revoke what I consider to be a 365-day unrestricted license at the point that this application is agreed, and I've been allowed to put the noise measurement procedures into place effectively.
And you mentioned you have 10 people employed, and I don't know if this question is allowable, so I look to your advice, Chair. The 10 people, are they full-time, part-time, casual?
So I have 10 families whose livelihood directly depends on the operation of the shoot, and they are broken down into cleaners who clean the house. So the house and the shoot need to work together to be viable. I note in one of the comments made by Mr. Rawlings that people don't stay in the area. We have plenty of people who shoot at the shoot who stay in the house. The two are linked. I have cleaners who clean the house on a regular basis. I have people who serve coffees, teas. I have people who look after the ground, cut the lawns, and a whole raft of individuals who come and go to do things like maintenance. I have people there at the moment that are doing repair work and various things at the ground. So there are at least 10 families that are reliant upon the success of the site operation, which is the site operation and its success is totally linked to the success of the shoot.
Thank you. I've got a question, please. It's probably best answered by Mr. Rogers, I believe it is.
Rogers, yeah.
One of the previous speakers asked about the compliance to the CIEH guidance from 2003.
Yes.
Could you give me an opinion, please, on whether your application is, in your opinion, in compliance with that? Thank you.
No problem. Yes, there's a very detailed explanation given in my report, which includes my expert opinion on that matter, and the CIH guidance is purely that. It is guidance only, and each and every situation must be considered against local planning policy and national planning policy. So for it to stand on its own in isolation and be slavishly followed is an incorrect application of it. In fact, the guidance itself acknowledges the fact that there's a range of suggested criteria which are very much dependent on the locality and the character of the area. And I go into great detail in my section 12 to justify how I've come up with a flexible criteria, which is looking at the noise levels when there is no shooting at all, in which the levels of noise in Fenton are fairly high, and it justifies a shooting noise level that is toward the upper side end of the scale for the CIH guidance. So in that sense, it is entirely aligned with the guidance, CIH guidance, but it also acknowledges the fact that the aims of the planning policy are for not no impact, but to acknowledge that that the mitigated impact should be achieving a low level of impact. And in my opinion, the criteria that I've suggested, which is one that actually is smart criteria, it relies on the changing noise climate, or in fact the soundscape as it is described, and that caters for the spirit of the guidance, which is now quite out of date. However, it does sit there as something which I've thoroughly considered and I've applied and provided my opinion on. So what I've put forward draws on my 30 years experience as an expert in acoustics, and is entirely in line with national planning policy, and indeed was put before your environmental health officers and in principle agreed on that basis.
Councillor Woods.
Thank you. It's to Mark a question tomorrow, really. It's just about, we've got quite a few conditions. If approved, we've got quite a few conditions laid down in it, operating hours and things like that. Particularly, the 150 days a year and not a maximum of 4 days in a week. I assume, can you confirm you're happy to comply with those conditions? And how are you going to make sure you do that? Because it could be quite tricky unless you keep very detailed records.
We currently have published opening times for the public. It's absolutely critically important that people know when we're open, especially on public days, because they turn up reliant upon the shoot being open and closed during those hours. So we stick to those hours. I don't see why that would be difficult.
Obviously, what you've said previously, you've got a bit of a dispute with the council over what was approved before and what you're actually doing. Is there any dispute over those conditions? Are you quite happy with those conditions?
I'm perfectly happy, and I was part of the process to agree those conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Trotter, please.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Rogers. Obviously the expert and gentleman to my left, the applicant, has said that there are different types of guns used. I think you mentioned the 12 bore, but I think other guns are used with different cartridges. So how can you, I'm sure that differs the level of noise with each gun used. How can you do, say categorically what the decibels are going to be when you don't know who's going to bring what gun on what day? So is it an average? Because that's, to me, that's a little bit of guesswork, and that's no disrespect. You're the expert, but
Sure.
me as a lay person, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Afternoon, councillor. It's a fair and reasonable question. So when when I did measurements on the site, what we do, and in the back of the report listed exactly the guns and the cartridges that were used. So what was used and what was effectively measured and monitored was the sound output, or the sound received at Fenton, for a variety of different guns and ammunition. So from that perspective, it is an average, because that is exactly what the shooting noise level is, but it does consider each and every single shot. So it looks at the highest ones and then averages those. So effectively you've got a worst case average, if that makes sense. And what perhaps may help to understand, because it is a technical subject after all, is the measurements are very accurate. The thing that really makes a difference, even between the different guns and the different cartridges, and it's not a huge difference, but you can see it in the actual shots, shot noise levels, is the wind direction. And so therefore the direction of the wind is actually one of the strongest cases of controlling the noise, because the times when the wind direction is actually in the direction of Fenton, so would be the worst case conditions as an average over the year, are very few days actually, and the analysis of that is also done in the report, which combines with the different types of guns. So the short answer is yes, it's an average, but it's an average of the worst case examples which are taken from a range of guns and ammunition that would typically be used at the ground. And that's real data. It's not predicted or anything else. It's based on real measurements with a wind in its worst case condition, which occurs very infrequently, if that's helpful.
Yeah, just one final question. Obviously, there's different capabilities of people shooting the clays. And I understand, am I right in saying they're moving targets? If they miss one of the clays, do they get the chance to basically shoot again? So are you getting extra bangs? You know, it's not just one shot to one clay, is it?
I could very simply answer that. People come to the ground and typically the vast majority of them pay for a 50 bird sporting round, which means they shoot 50 targets. Whether they hit them or miss them, they shoot 50 targets.
Thank you.
Councillor Bishnarsin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a question to Mr. Rogers. Are these DB figures that are being quoted, are they actually weighted figures, or are these figures just an actual measurement?
Yes, so afternoon, Councillor. The measurements are weighted figures, so they are DBA figures, and that really is a weighting that estimates a human response. So rather than, they are real measurements based on. Again, if you would like to go to the back of the report and have a look, you'll see some graphs that show the individual shots, and it will make a bit more sense to you because that's a time trace that shows you the DBA value as a short-term measurement. So effectively it's a maximum. So you see the graph jump up, have a spike and drop down again. So that level, of that top of that spike, is the level, the DBA level that's then used for the averages, which is the SNL, which is the shooting noise level, which is comes straight from the CIH guidance. So effectively, the methodology that's used to crunch the numbers is from that guidance, and effectively what comes out at the end, the figure that comes out at the end, is then a single figure that represents that whole period of shooting. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Could I ask Mr. Rogers, could you just give us a very, very brief description of how the logarithmic scale works regards decibels and dBA in particular?
Certainly, Chair. Probably the best example of this is if you have two washing machines, each with generating 50 decibels, then the total noise level, which is obviously twice the amount, is only 3 decibels higher. So the total measured noise level then would be 53. So for each time you double the energy, you get a 3 dB increase. So that's the first thing to understand, that adding these numbers together has to be done you can't do it in normal fashion, not arithmetically. So effectively, the reason for that is because the scale from the lowest levels that you can hear to the highest levels that are dangerous to hearing it is enormous. It's huge. It would be fairly meaningless to be talking about the level of pressure. So the best thing that what logarithmic scale does is it compresses the scale down to something that's sensible. So from the range of hearing around about 0 dB up to the point of where you experience pain and potentially hearing loss around 140 decibels dB. That is the range that we're working in. So when we're talking about a level of 60, you're talking about an average level, which is then constructed of the maximums, if that makes sense. So in your mind, effectively, it's an average shot level. So if you're standing in Fenton, it's the sort of level that you would hear as an average at that point through your ears as a dBA value, and the A is a weighting that's applied across the frequency range because humans don't hear so well at low frequency, so it takes off the low frequency, and in the mid-range where we hear speech very well, it actually adds on a bit, and it makes this correction all the way along, and then adds up the numbers to form the dBA single figure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Think that's it from, Councillor Robbins, please.
Thank you. This question's to Mr. Rogers. I just wanted to ask, if the noise mitigation works out that it's over the level, what happens then? And also, if the gun moves across, how can you gauge this? If the wind is coming from a different direction, do you then do it on average?
Afternoon, Councillor. Yes, it's an average, but partly this is constructed from it's effectively a risk management process. So the direction of the wind will be constantly monitored. So there'll be a period of time where you have the forecast, which you've got to consider, but also what's actually happening, because obviously the two can be different. So there'll be a level of confidence with which you'll know what's likely to be happening over that day in terms of the wind, and that will allow you to make there's a calculation sheet which is effectively once you know the wind direction which is expected in the worst case over the shooting period, you then can inform the layout and the shot directions to minimize the levels at Fenton in particular, but in any of the receptors that all the way around. So it's effectively a smart management process which enables the ground to proactively manage the noise based on what the wind is doing. Also, the worst case, obviously, all of the numbers you're seeing in this report are really the worst case examples. So when we're talking about the impact, we're talking about the worst case impacts. A lot of the time it will be a lot better than this, to a point where if the wind is in the direction away from Fenton towards the ground, you may barely be able to hear the shots.
Thank you. And can you answer the question with regards to what will happen if it works out is over the level, which it should be?
Yes. Yes. So in that case, there isn't constant monitoring of the noise levels in all positions. But if there is a complaint process which is if residents are being disturbed, then there's a checking loop that happens to make sure that things have been done correctly according to the noise management plan. So if you follow the process that's in the noise management plan, the result should be a low impact. That's the true test of the pudding. If residents are saying that is not the case, then it triggers the need to review whether or not things have been done. Also, I would say that there is the ability then for environmental health to then feed back over time, and that can be reviewed to refine it, to make it as practicable as possible.
Councillor Selby, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more question, if I may, to Mark, if I please. We heard earlier a statement from Mr. Richard Gray, and he spoke about competitions. I was just wondering whether you had any plans to hold competitions in the future. Thank you.
It's a good question, and the answer is an absolute no. The shoot that I'm running is a really, in comparison to other shoots in the area like Alston and others, is a tiny shoot, and the demands placed upon a shoot to run competitions is it's just not worth doing. So I have absolutely no interest or aspiration to run competitions. I do occasionally do charity days. I've done charity days for the ABF. They're not competitions as such. I do a Christmas shoot where we give a turkey or a prize to the winning local who does the best, but they aren't really true competitions in that sense. They're just giving prizes to the people who've got the highest score.
Thank you, Mr. Crane. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I think that's the end of the questions. I will have a 10-minute break now before we ask the officer questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we could we be back here, please, for 25 to? Thank you. Could we all take our seats, please? Right now with questions to the presenting officer, please. Could we refrain from a load of preamble, please, and just ask a straight question? Because obviously we're conscious of being succinct and moving things forward relatively smoothly, hopefully. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Is the current planning permission unenforceable and unregulated?
Good question. I've set out in the officer report my view on what the current planning permission does in terms of restrictions and what the limitations are on that permission. Clearly, members have heard differing views on that, and that's no surprise to us as officers. Those views have been presented from both sides, you know, in terms of whether that condition's enforceable. The fact is that there's no definitive answer, because in order to have a definitive answer, there would need to be a lawful development certificate, or that decision would need to be played out through either a planning appeal or inquiry, and an inspector effectively make a ruling on it. And we just don't have that categoric answer at the moment. So in short, the officer position that I presented and encouraging members to place weight on is that the condition attached to the current planning permission from 2000 is enforceable, and it does restrict shooting to 50 days per year.
Sorry, I don't know if I had.
It is, yeah.
Okay, I don't understand then, given the figures that I mentioned in my questions to Mr. Crane. They're advertising that people can turn up and shoot on 80 days a year, and then there's some corporate days. So that sounds like they're going to go over 50 days, and I think that Mr. Crane has more or less admitted that, because and I understand the reasons why he does. He's trying to run a business. So I don't understand why we're not enforcing.
I'll just clarify what was said earlier. So if you wind the clock back to 2018, there was a planning application to increase the number of days, which was refused. Subsequently, an enforcement notice was served by the council, and that was based on, prior to serving the enforcement notice, the council had retrieved information from the shoot through a planning contravention notice that said shooting had exceeded 50 days per year, and that formed the basis of the enforcement notice at that time. The additional, before the inquiry happened, an updated noise assessment was produced, which was accepted by the council and then has formed the basis for this new application. In the intervening years, two and a half years that it's taken to get to this point in determining the application, as you've heard, there have been allegations that the shooters exceeded the number of days. Again, I accept it. Although you've heard from the Assistant Director of Planning, we don't have evidence at the moment to say categorically that it has. I think it is likely, based on, as you've said, the what's been advertised and what has been alleged, that in those intervening years the shoot has exceeded the 50 days. But we wouldn't take further enforcement action until the planning permission has been determined, and that's why there's been no further enforcement action if the planning permission gets approved today, that issue effectively falls away. It regularises the situation. If planning permission gets refused today, that's a separate decision for the council to take in terms of pursuing further enforcement action.
Councillor Wood, please.
Yeah, thank you. I feel it's about the conditions again. I know we've got quite a lot of conditions on, but you know, I question, are they enforceable? The proposals for the conditions, are they enforceable? Because, you know, for instance, on page 44, condition under noise management and monitoring, number 9, each shooting day must be recorded and must be available for the local planning authority, blah, 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 blah. I mean, what happens if they don't do that? Because my experience of enforcement and conditions, it's okay putting a lot of conditions on, but if they're not enforceable, they're not very good, are they? So, you know, what confidence can we have that those conditions are enforceable?
So there's clear legal principles and guidance in the NPPF around what a planning condition must be in terms of the way it's drafted and written. Appreciate there are a lot of conditions in this instance, but you've heard from the applicant that those conditions that are recommended have been discussed with the applicant and agreed by the applicant. As officers, we consider they are appropriately drafted and meet the tests and would be enforceable. The requirements to effectively collect and hold information about the type of shooting that's happening and make that available on request, the condition that requires the weather monitoring plan, and again to hold information in that respect, those conditions are all designed to aid monitoring of what's going on at the shoot. And if they were, for example, if we requested information about the type of shooting that had been taking place and it wasn't provided, that would be a breach of condition, and we would have the appropriate enforcement powers to either serve an enforcement notice or a breach of condition notice.
Councillor Johnson, please.
Is that this application is asking to go from 50 hours to 150, which is a big jump in hours. Have we got the opportunity here to sort of go to, say, possibly 100 hours and see how it goes with the relevant thing to be able to come later and ask for more hours if it pleases both sides? Or have we got to go definitely to 150 hours?
Firstly, I think the residents would be very happy if it was 50 hours. It's 50 days and 150 days, which is the main point. I'll provide an answer on that point, and then looking towards Assistant Director of Planning or legal advisor to back me up. The shoots applied for 150 days, and that's what we've considered the application on that basis. Whilst that restriction is controlled by condition, we need to consider whether altering it to an extent would substantially change the application, and depending what number was put forward, you know, that's a judgment call to make. But if you go beyond that step, we don't have any evidence in front of us to justify, for example, why 100 days or 90 days would be appropriate and necessary. And the necessity point about a condition is one of the sort of the legal tests. We also have to consider whether it would be reasonable, and in the absence of any evidence to say otherwise, it would likely fail the condition test on that basis. And finally, I think it would change the application to a point where we would want to consult, and you know, whether members were saying they felt 120 days, 100 days was acceptable, we would still want to consult and take the views of both the applicant and the residents on that.
If I remember rightly, on part of this paperwork, the residents were saying about, on one of the, I think it was the lady, 78 days. They would be happy with 78 days. I'm just concerned about the fact that, you know, we're putting all these conditions on, and as Councillor Wood has just said, they didn't stick to the conditions before. So are they going to stick to them now? And I think if we was to restrict the days a little bit more and monitor it and then come back later, I fully appreciate what you're saying. It would be a whole new planning application. So perhaps it's not the right way to go, but then you're meeting them halfway, aren't you? The residents are saying 78, he wants 150, if you had 100. But if it's not possible, it's not possible. I just wondered if it was possible to do something like that.
In short, I don't believe it's possible, and I think members need to make the decision today based on whether they consider the 150 days with all the additional conditions in the noise management plan is acceptable, and if it's or not is the decision you're being asked to make.
Thank you. And I might ask our barrister to jump in as well in a minute. I think just to clarify, the shoot has got permission for 50 days worth of shooting on part of the site, and then there's the 28 days that's permitted under the permitted development order on other parts of the site. I think that's probably where the 78 days that the public speaker was probably referring to, but we've got to tread very carefully if you were trying to use that as a fallback in terms of, well, let's go back to the 78 because the locals seem happy with that. They can do that already with that, and we can't impose additional conditions really, because that's not reasonable, because they've already got permission through either the permitted development order or their other permission. In terms of whether you could change the number of days through a condition, it would be for the committee to decide whether that significantly altered the scope of the planning permission that had been applied for. So you could. My professional advice, as Phil's already said, in terms of his advice, would be that that probably does significantly alter the scope of the application. We would probably want to reconsult the residents and the applicant. And therefore, my advice to the committee is, whilst you could consider it, I probably wouldn't, because I think that's a different application, really. And I don't know if James just wants to jump in and clarify anything I've got slightly wrong.
Yes, the advice you've received from Ms. Whitaker is broadly correct. Just to be absolutely precise, a local planning authority has power to grant planning permission on an application subject to conditions, and such condition may have the effect of modifying the development applied for, whether by limiting, enlarging it, or changing its nature to some extent. And I'm just citing from the key case that considers this. There's a principle called the Wheatcroft principle, and that says the result of imposing such condition must not be that a development which in substance is not that which was applied for results. But that's a question for you as members. You've heard the advice from your officers, in effect, that it would result in development which is in substance not that which is applied for. But that is your judgment. You do have power, legal power, to impose a condition which does alter the development. There is another, that's what's known as a substantive limitation on your powers. There's obviously a procedural limitation, which is to do with whether you need to consult or not. And so whether you go, if you were to decide to impose a condition limiting the number of days to a different number that's not proposed, there's a question of whether you would have needed to have consulted on that, because that's something both the applicant would have wanted to commented on, and no doubt other residents or other interested parties. So there's two sort of limitations on your power to do that. I would also add that, I'm not sure if it's directly goes to your question, but there's a question of granting a temporary permission to see what happens. Just to be absolutely clear, temporary, you should only grant permission if you are aware of the impacts. So you can't grant a temporary permission if the impacts are uncertain or there's doubt over it, to sort of to test it and see, if you see what I mean. You need to have, as a planning decision maker, you need to be satisfied that you have sufficient information before you to grant permission for whatever length of days, whatever number of days you decide. So you can't grant a sort of test permission to suck it and see if you don't know what the impacts are.
Can I just ask one more question, Emma? I said 100 days. Would that mean as well that those other 28 days would be added on to that? So in effect, they would have 128 days.
I mean, my view, and again, happy to have others' input, is that seeks